In the heart of the ancient Persian Empire stood a kingdom so powerful that its influence reached across continents. 127 provinces bowed before a single throne. Its armies were feared. Its wealth was beyond imagination. Its laws shaped the lives of millions. At the center of this mighty empire stood the royal city of Susa, a city where towering marble palaces touched the sky, magnificent gardens bloomed with breathtaking beauty, and merchants from distant lands filled its bustling streets with silk, spices, gold, silver, ivory, and precious treasures. To many who entered its gates, Susa did not simply look like a capital city. It looked like the center of the world itself. Yet hidden behind its walls of wealth and power, God was quietly preparing one of the greatest stories of courage, faith, and divine providence ever recorded in history. Welcome to Mind Trace Tales, where history meets faith and the timeless stories of the Bible come alive. Journey through mighty kingdoms, courageous heroes, unforgettable miracles, and the extraordinary hand of God at work throughout history. Subscribe, and let every story strengthen your faith and inspire your heart. Morning arrived long before the streets of Susa became crowded. As the first rays of sunlight reflected from the polished marble walls of the royal palace, merchants were already opening their stalls. The aroma of fresh bread drifted through the marketplaces. Camel caravans entered the city gates carrying spices from Arabia, fine linen from Egypt, precious stones from distant lands, and rare woods from forests hundreds of miles away. Every day, people from many nations poured into Susa. Some came to trade. Some came seeking justice. Some came hoping to gain favor with the king. Others arrived carrying magnificent gifts from distant provinces, gifts intended to honor the ruler whose authority stretched farther than they had ever traveled. The city never seemed to sleep. Blacksmiths hammered glowing iron into swords and armor for the Persian army. Artists carved magnificent statues and palace decorations. Servants hurried through crowded streets carrying food, fabrics, scrolls, and royal supplies. Royal messengers galloped through the city on horseback, carrying sealed decrees that would soon travel across deserts, rivers, mountains, and valleys to every corner of the empire. Everywhere one looked, life was moving, business was flourishing, power was growing. The Persian Empire was unlike anything the ancient world had ever seen. Its borders stretched from India in the east to Kush in Africa. 127 provinces, hundreds of cities, countless villages, millions of people, different languages, different customs, different cultures, yet all lived beneath one royal authority. One throne, one crown, one king. Many believed that no empire on earth could ever surpass Persia. Its armies were disciplined. Each day, its roads a throne room became the center of government for the entire empire. From every province, governors traveled to Susa carrying reports of harvests, trade, taxes, military victories, and matters requiring the king's attention. Military commanders arrived wearing polished armor, bringing news from distant borders. Judges presented difficult legal disputes. Foreign ambassadors brought greetings from neighboring kingdoms. Royal scribes sat at beautifully carved wooden tables with scrolls spread before them. Every word spoken by the king was carefully written down. Every decree received the royal seal. Because once a law was established according to the customs of Persia, it could not simply be ignored. It became part of the law of the empire. The king listened. He questioned. He judged. He rewarded. He appointed leaders. He settled disputes between provinces. Millions of lives were influenced by decisions made within that single room. To ordinary people living hundreds of miles away, the throne in Susa represented justice, authority, and absolute power. Many believed there was no greater ruler anywhere on earth. Yet there was one thing no king could ever command: the unfolding plan of God. Scene 5. Honor from every nation. Use images of people bringing gifts and bowing before the king. Narrator. Throughout the year, visitors from distant lands arrived at the palace gates. Some had traveled for weeks, others for months. Caravans stretched for miles across dusty roads before finally reaching the royal city. They came bearing gifts worthy of a king. Beautiful Arabian horses, gold refined by master craftsmen, silver vessels engraved with remarkable skill, rare spices whose fragrance filled the palace, silks woven by expert hands, ivory carvings, jewels sparkling with brilliant colors. Each gift represented more than wealth. It represented loyalty, respect, submission. As they entered the throne room, ambassadors lowered themselves before King Ahasuerus. Governors bowed deeply. Princes honored him. Military commanders saluted him. Even powerful rulers from neighboring lands treated him with great respect. The throne room became a living picture of an empire united beneath one crown. To the people watching, King Ahasuerus seemed untouchable. His wealth appeared endless, his influence unmatched, his authority unquestioned. But history often reminds us, the higher a man believes he has climbed, the more unexpected the turning point can become. And that turning point was about to begin with a feast unlike anything Persia had ever seen. Meanwhile, the king had prepared a feast. Dates, figs, honey, pomegranates, fine wine. Everything was served in abundance. The great hall echoed with conversation. Military commanders spoke of victories. Governors discussed the prosperity of their provinces. Foreign ambassadors admired the magnificence surrounding them. Every guest left with the same conclusion. No king on earth possessed wealth like King Ahasuerus. As the evening continued, the king's heart grew merry with wine. The atmosphere became louder. The celebration became more relaxed. Then, the king conceived an idea that seemed simple, yet would change the course of history forever. While the king entertained princes, governors, generals, and noblemen from every corner of the empire, another celebration was taking place within the palace. It was hosted by the woman who sat beside the throne of Persia, Queen Vashti. Among the women of the royal household, Vashti was admired for her elegance, dignity, and noble bearing. She wore garments woven from the finest fabrics in the empire, embroidered with gold thread and adorned with precious jewels crafted by Persia's most skilled artisans. Her attendants carefully prepared every detail of the royal banquet. Beautiful curtains decorated the palace chambers. Golden lamps illuminated the magnificent halls. Tables overflowed with fruits, sweet cakes, roasted delicacies, fragrant oils, and fine drinks prepared especially for the women of the palace. Music floated gently through the royal chambers as laughter and conversation filled the air. Everything reflected the honor of the Persian queen. She was not merely the king's wife. She represented the dignity of the royal house. To the women of Persia, she was a symbol of beauty, honor, and influence. No one inside the palace imagined that before the sun would set, everything she possessed, her title, her position, even her crown, would be gone forever. Looking across the magnificent banquet hall, King Ahasuerus desired to display one final treasure before his honored guests. Not another golden vessel, not another priceless jewel, not another rare treasure collected from conquered nations. He wished to present the beauty of his own queen. The king summoned 7 trusted palace officials. Approaching the throne, they bowed respectfully before him. The king spoke with confidence. "Go, bring Queen Vashti before me. Let her come wearing the royal crown, so that the princes, governors, and noblemen may behold her beauty." Without hesitation, the 7 officials bowed once more, then hurried through the palace corridors carrying the king's command. Throughout Persia, a king's command was expected to be obeyed immediately. Very few people would ever imagine refusing the ruler of the greatest empire on earth. Yet those royal servants were about to return, with an answer no one expected. The music stopped. Conversation faded. The laughter disappeared. The royal officials approached the throne and delivered the queen's answer. For a brief moment, silence filled the magnificent hall. King Ahasuerus remained motionless. The nobles looked toward one another. Military commanders lowered their eyes. The servants froze where they stood. The queen had refused. The king, in a kingdom where royal commands were treated as law, such defiance carried enormous consequences. The celebration that had begun with laughter was suddenly overshadowed by anger. No one yet realized this was the moment that would open the palace gates. For a poor Jewish orphan named Esther, the advisors presented their recommendation. Let a royal decree be written. Let it be recorded among the laws of the Medes and Persians, a law that cannot be revoked. Queen Vashti shall never again appear before King Ahasuerus, and let her royal position be given to another who is more worthy. The king listened. The hall fell silent once again. Then, he gave his approval. Royal scribes immediately dipped their pens into ink. Every word was written with great care. The king's official seal was pressed into the decree. Once sealed, The law became irreversible. The woman who had once worn Persia's crown was queen no longer. Her throne now stood empty. As months passed, the king's anger slowly subsided. The palace no longer echoed with celebrations. The throne beside him remained empty. His advisors recognized the silence. Respectfully, they approached the king once again. "Your Majesty, let a search be made throughout all your provinces. Appoint trusted officials to gather beautiful young women from every corner of the empire. Bring them to the royal palace in Susa. There they shall receive the finest care and preparation. Then the king may choose a new queen." The suggestion pleased King Ahasuerus. Without delay, the order was issued. Royal officials spread throughout the empire. They searched cities, villages, towns, and distant communities. None of them knew that the young woman heaven had already chosen was not living in luxury. She was not the daughter of a nobleman. She possessed no riches. She wore no crown. She lived quietly with her elderly cousin and guardian, a faithful Jewish man named Mordecai, and her name was Esther. Far beyond the towering marble walls of the royal palace, beyond the bustling markets of Susa, beyond the luxurious gardens where kings and nobles walked, lived a people whose lives were very different. They were Jews. Many years earlier, their ancestors had been carried away from their homeland into exile. Though some had returned to Jerusalem, many remained scattered throughout the Persian Empire. Among them was a young Jewish woman whose life appeared ordinary in every way. Her name was Hadassah, but throughout Persia, she would become known by another name, Esther. She owned no palace. She wore no jewels. She possessed no servants. No one bowed before her. No one recognized her in the crowded streets. She lived in a simple home built from sun-dried clay bricks, with a roof of wooden beams and thatched reeds that offered little protection during heavy rains. Each morning she awoke before sunrise. She swept the dusty floor, fetched water from the village well, prepared simple meals from coarse bread, lentils, herbs, and whatever little vegetables could be found. Her hands, though gentle, had grown rough from years of honest work. To those who passed her in the street, she looked like any other young Jewish woman trying to survive another day. No one imagined that heaven already knew her name. Every evening, as the noise of the village slowly faded, Mordecai reminded Esther of the stories passed down through generations. He spoke of Abraham, who trusted God without knowing where the journey would lead. He spoke of Isaac and Jacob, whose descendants became the nation of Israel. He spoke of Joseph, who was sold as a slave, yet rose to become a ruler in Egypt because God was with him. He spoke of Moses, who led God's people through the Red Sea. He spoke of Joshua, who watched the walls of Jericho fall. He spoke of David, the shepherd boy who defeated a giant because his confidence rested not in himself, but in the living God. As Esther listened, those stories became more than history. They became hope. Mordecai would often tell her, "Never measure your future by your present circumstances. The God who lifted Joseph from a prison can lift anyone. The God who made David a king has never forgotten his people." Those words settled deep within Esther's heart. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she believed that the God of Israel remained faithful. Within hours, royal messengers mounted the fastest horses in the empire. Each rider carried carefully sealed scrolls bearing the authority of King Ahasuerus. They rode through crowded cities, across dry deserts, over rocky mountain passes, along winding rivers, through villages hidden among distant hills. Every province received the king's decree. Every governor read the royal command aloud. Every official understood. The throne beside the king was now vacant. Persia, the greatest empire on earth, had no queen. Yet while the empire discussed the fall of Vashti, far away from the palace, in a quiet Jewish community, life continued as it always had. No marble halls, no golden throne, no royal servants, no luxurious feasts, only humble homes, simple clothing, hard work, and unwavering faith in the God of Israel. It was there, far from the splendor of Susa, that heaven's chosen queen was living without anyone knowing. The officials moved carefully through the village. They spoke with local leaders. They observed the young women of the community. Their assignment was simple: find those whose beauty was worthy of the royal palace. Bring them to Susa. Among the crowd stood Esther. She wore the same faded linen garments she had worn countless times before. There were no jewels around her neck, no expensive perfume, No royal attendants surrounding her. Only quiet dignity, gentleness, and humility. Yet something about her drew attention. Not only her beauty, but the peaceful confidence she carried. She did not push herself forward. She did not seek recognition. She simply stood quietly beside Mordecai. The officials noticed her immediately. Questions were asked. Her name was recorded. Before the day was over, the decision had been made. Esther would be taken to the king's palace. Esther's parents had died when she was still a child. The Bible does not tell us how they died. Perhaps it was illness. Perhaps hardship. Perhaps circumstances that history has long forgotten. But one thing is certain. The little girl who had lost both her father and mother was not left alone. A man named Mordecai opened his heart and his home to her. The scriptures describe him as her cousin, yet he raised Esther as though she were his own daughter. To Esther, Mordecai was more than family. He became her protector, her teacher, her guide, her source of comfort through years of uncertainty. Though they had very little, he never allowed her to feel abandoned. Together they lived simply. Together they worked. Together they prayed. Their home was small. Their clothing was worn. Their meals were modest. But within those humble walls, there was something more valuable than silver or gold. There was faith. As the enormous bronze gates slowly opened, Esther stepped into a world unlike anything she had ever imagined. The sounds of the busy streets disappeared behind her. Before her stretched magnificent courtyards paved with polished stone. Crystal fountains sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Tall marble columns supported elegant balconies decorated with intricate Persian carvings. Servants dressed in fine garments moved gracefully through the palace, each carrying out carefully assigned duties. Everything around Esther reflected order, discipline, luxury, and unimaginable wealth. Yet despite all the splendor surrounding her, her heart remained humble. She had not come seeking power. She had not come seeking fame. She had simply been carried along by events she could not control. Like Joseph carried into Egypt. Like Daniel carried into Babylon. She now found herself in a place she had never planned to be. But God had not forgotten her. Not for a single moment. Although Queen Esther now wore the royal crown, life around the palace continued as usual. Every morning, royal officials hurried through the palace gates carrying scrolls and messages. Military commanders reported to the king. Governors arrived from distant provinces seeking wisdom and direction. And just outside the king's gate sat a familiar face, Mordecai. He had not forgotten Esther, nor had Esther forgotten him. Whenever possible, Mordecai came to the palace gate, hoping to hear news of the young woman he had raised as his own daughter. Day after day, he watched. He listened. He prayed. Little did he know, God had placed him there for a reason. One ordinary afternoon, as palace guards changed their watch, Mordecai overheard something alarming. Two royal officers, Bigthan and Teresh, trusted guards responsible for protecting the king, were whispering together. Their voices were low. Their faces were tense. They believed no one was listening. But Mordecai heard enough to understand the terrifying truth. The two men were planning to assassinate King Ahasuerus. If their plot succeeded, the Persian Empire would be thrown into chaos. Mordecai acted immediately. He did not ignore what he had heard, nor did he use the information for personal gain. Instead, he sent word to Queen Esther. Esther, in turn, reported the conspiracy to the king. She made one important detail clear. The information had come from Mordecai. The king immediately ordered an investigation. Royal officers questioned the two guards. Evidence was gathered. The truth was uncovered. The conspiracy was real. Bigthan and Teresh were found guilty. Justice was swift. The king's life had been saved. As was the custom of the Persian Empire, everything was carefully recorded. Royal scribes opened the official chronicles. Using ink and parchment, they wrote down exactly what had happened. They recorded that Mordecai had uncovered the conspiracy. They recorded that Esther had informed the king. They recorded that the king's life had been preserved. Then, the book was closed. Life moved on. No celebration. No reward. No promotion. No public recognition. Mordecai simply returned to his place at the king's gate. From a human perspective, he had been forgotten. But heaven had not forgotten. Sometimes, God allows faithful acts to remain unnoticed, not because he has ignored them, but because he has appointed the perfect time to reveal them. The record waited quietly inside the royal archives. Soon, it would change everything. The rise of Haman. As time passed, another man rose to power within the Persian Empire. His name was Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite. King Ahasuerus promoted him above all the other officials in the kingdom. His robes reflected his new authority. His servants walked proudly behind him. His influence spread quickly throughout the palace. Wherever Haman appeared, people stepped aside. Royal officials bowed low before him. The king himself commanded that all who served at the palace gate should honor Haman. And so, one by one, they bowed. Governors bowed. Servants bowed. Officials bowed. Soldiers bowed. Everyone bowed. Except one man, Mordecai, the man who would not bow. Every morning, the same scene unfolded. Haman approached with pride. The palace officials bowed deeply before him. But Mordecai remained standing, calm, respectful, unmoved. His fellow officials became nervous. "Why do you refuse the king's command?" they asked. Day after day, they questioned him. Finally, Mordecai answered, "I am a Jew." His loyalty belonged first to the God of Israel. He would show respect to those in authority, but he would not give the kind of honor that belonged to God alone. When Haman discovered the reason, his pride turned into fury. He was not satisfied with punishing Mordecai alone. His hatred grew so great that he decided to destroy every Jew living throughout the Persian Empire. Not just one man, an entire people. The greatest crisis in Esther's story had begun. One proud man's wounded ego was about to become an empire-wide tragedy. Yet even now, as evil quietly spread through the palace, God was already positioning his servants exactly where they needed to be. Haman's hatred for Mordecai consumed him. Every time he passed through the king's gate and saw Mordecai standing without bowing, his anger burned even hotter. But revenge against one man was not enough. Learning that Mordecai was a Jew, Haman devised a far more terrible plan. He approached King Ahasuerus with carefully chosen words. "There is a certain people scattered throughout your empire. They keep their own customs, and they do not live like the other nations. It is not in the king's interest to tolerate them." He deliberately hid one important fact. He never mentioned that these people were the Jews. He offered the king an enormous sum of silver to carry out his plan. Without realizing the true consequences, King Ahasuerus removed his royal signet ring and placed it into Haman's hand. That ring carried the authority of the empire. Whatever decree was sealed with it became law. Royal scribes worked through the day. Copies of the decree were written in the languages of every province. Messengers mounted swift horses and rode in every direction. The order was chilling. On the appointed day, every Jew, young and old, men, women, and children, could be destroyed. The city of Susa was left in confusion, while Haman and the king sat down to drink. An entire people unknowingly stood beneath the shadow of death. When Mordecai learned of the decree, his heart broke. He tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth. He covered himself with ashes. Throughout the city, the cries of Jewish families filled the air. Parents embraced their children. Communities gathered to pray. Fear spread from house to house. Mordecai stood outside the king's gate weeping bitterly. No one wearing sackcloth was permitted to enter the palace. So he remained outside, crying out in sorrow before God. Inside the palace, Queen Esther heard that Mordecai was dressed in mourning. She was deeply troubled. She sent fresh clothes, hoping he would change. But Mordecai refused. His grief could not be covered by fine garments. Instead, he sent Esther a copy of the king's decree, along with a message that would change history. The message reached Esther's hands. As she slowly unrolled the scroll, her eyes moved across the king's decree. With every line she read, the weight of the tragedy grew heavier. Not strangers, not another nation, her own people. Every Jewish family in the empire had been sentenced to death. Mordecai urged her to go before the king and plead for mercy. But Esther hesitated. She knew the law. Anyone who entered the king's presence without being summoned could be executed immediately. Only if the king extended his golden scepter would that person be spared. And Esther had not been called to see the king for 30 days. To enter uninvited could mean certain death. Fear filled her heart. She sent word back to Mordecai, explaining the danger. Mordecai's reply has echoed through history for more than 2,000 years. Do not think that because you are in the king's palace, you alone will escape. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Then came the words that have inspired generations of believers. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Those words pierced Esther's heart. Suddenly, everything made sense. The loss of her parents, Mordecai's love, the journey to the palace, the favor she had received, the crown upon her head. None of it had happened by accident. God had been preparing her for this very moment. Esther's fear gave way to faith. She sent one final message to Mordecai. Go, gather all the Jews in Susa. Fast for me for 3 days and 3 nights. Do not eat or drink. My servants and I will fast as well. Then she spoke the words that revealed her courage. I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. For 3 days, the Jewish people prayed. The palace was quiet. Esther sought not human wisdom, but God's strength. The fate of an entire nation rested upon one courageous decision. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes. Her heart was steady. Her steps were slow. The great doors of the throne room opened. Every eye turned toward the queen. Silence filled the hall. She stood before the most powerful ruler on earth, without being invited. For one long moment, no one moved. Then, King Ahasuerus looked upon Esther. Instead of anger, he was pleased. Slowly, he stretched out the golden scepter. Esther stepped forward and touched its tip. Her life was spared. The king asked, What is it, Queen Esther? Even up to half my kingdom, it shall be given to you. But Esther answered with wisdom. Rather than revealing everything at once, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. She trusted God's timing. She knew that courage must walk hand in hand with wisdom. One act of courage had opened the door, but the battle was not yet over. Before another day had passed, pride would lead Haman toward his very night. While Haman dreamed of destroying Mordecai, something unexpected happened. The king could not sleep. The most powerful ruler on earth could command armies. He could build magnificent palaces. He could issue laws that stretched across 127 provinces. Yet on this night, he could not command sleep. Instead of lying awake in frustration, he ordered his servants to bring the royal chronicles. The great book recording the history of his reign was opened. Page after page was read aloud. Then, the reader came to one remarkable entry. It was the account of Mordecai, the man who had uncovered the conspiracy of Bigthan and Teresh, the man who had saved the king's life. King Ahasuerus interrupted the reading. What honor or reward was given to Mordecai for this? The servants searched the records. Their answer surprised the king. Nothing has been done for him, your majesty. Nothing. Years had passed, yet God had not forgotten. The reward had simply been waiting for the perfect moment. Early that morning, Haman entered the palace. He had come with only one purpose: to ask permission to hang Mordecai on the gallows he had built. Before Haman could speak, the king asked him a question. What should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor? Haman smiled to himself. Surely the king was speaking about him. Pride filled his heart. He answered confidently, Dress the man in the king's royal robes. Place him upon the king's own horse. Put the royal crown upon the horse's head. Lead him through the city streets, and proclaim before everyone, This is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honor. The king nodded. Then came the words Haman never expected. Excellent. Go immediately, and do exactly as you have said. For Mordecai the Jew. In that single moment, Haman's pride collapsed. The man he hated most was the very man he now had to honor. Before the eyes of the entire city, Haman led Mordecai through the streets of Susa. The one who had planned Mordecai's death was forced to proclaim his honor. God had begun to turn the story around. Later that day, the king and Haman attended Queen Esther's second banquet. Again the king asked, What is your request, Queen Esther? This time, Esther spoke with courage. If I have found favor in your sight, spare my life, and spare my people. The room fell silent. The king looked at Esther in shock. Who would dare do such a thing? Esther slowly turned toward Haman. Her voice did not tremble. The adversary, the enemy, is this wicked Haman. Every eye in the room turned toward him. The king's face filled with anger. The truth had finally been revealed. Scene 4, Justice. In his terror, Haman begged Queen Esther for mercy, but it was too late. The king returned. One of the palace officials spoke. The gallows Haman built for Mordecai still stands. The king answered with only 3 words. Hang him on it. The very instrument Haman had prepared for an innocent man became the instrument of his own judgment. Pride had destroyed him. Evil had trapped itself. Justice had prevailed. Although Persian law could not be reversed, The king gave Mordecai new authority. Another decree was sent throughout the empire. The Jewish people were permitted to defend themselves. When the appointed day arrived, God gave his people victory. What had been planned as a day of destruction became a day of deliverance. Fear turned into joy. Mourning became celebration. Tears became songs of thanksgiving. Mordecai was promoted to one of the highest positions in the kingdom. He exchanged sackcloth for royal garments. The humble guardian who once stood outside the palace gates now walked through them with honor. Queen Esther never forgot where she had come from. She remained faithful to the God who had guided every step of her journey. To remember this miraculous deliverance, the Jewish people established the Feast of Purim. Even today, generations continue to remember how God rescued his people through the courage of one faithful woman. The book of Esther never directly mentions the name of God, yet his fingerprints are found on every page. In a sleepless night, God was there. In a forgotten record book, God was there. In the courage of an orphan, God was there. In the downfall of the proud, God was there. And in the salvation of an entire nation, God was there. Perhaps that is why Esther's story still speaks to us today. There may be moments when God seems silent, moments when life feels uncertain, moments when nothing appears to make sense. But just because we cannot see his hand does not mean he is absent. He is still working behind the scenes, preparing, guiding, protecting, and fulfilling his perfect purpose. Like Esther, you may be exactly where God wants you to be for such a time as this. If this story strengthened your faith and reminded you that God is always at work, even when we cannot see him, please take a moment to support this channel. Like this video so more people can discover this incredible biblical story. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful Bible documentaries, true biblical history, and inspiring stories of faith. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. And share this video with your family, friends, and church community. You never know who needs the reminder that God is still working behind the scenes. Finally, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What lesson from Queen Esther's story touched your heart the most? Thank you for watching. May God bless you, strengthen your faith, and remind you that no matter what you are facing today, he is always working, even when you cannot see him. See you in the next story.